every generation that comes through now seems to be more disrespectful, to the point where people feel like they can carry weapons on the street without any consequences.
This furious rant by Eddie Hearn about the absolutely disgraceful state of policing in this country is absolutely spot on and an absolute must watch. You really have to watch this whole interview. He absolutely nails, better than I possibly could, exactly what is wrong with this country and how we are failing our children.
Like, I just know that when I grew up, which, you know, when I was 16, which was what, blimey, 1995, like that era, people were petrified to carry knives. I mean, people just didn't carry knives because you just knew that if you had a knife, you're going inside. And like when you went to a nightclub, very rarely would there be trouble. Might be a little scuffle, breakout or whatever, but you know, every now and again you'd hear something. I don't know.
Not that it makes it right, but I guess at least it was man on man.
When it did, it was like an isolated incident.
Yeah.
No one would walk around, and I feel like we've become so desensitised to things. Like, can we just take a minute to understand that kids are carrying machetes on the streets openly, yeah, and walking around and waving them about in a fight with someone where there's hundreds of people around? I just feel like the world's, like, it's gone so extreme now that all these incidents, you know, you look at the incident in Southport, right? It's been forgotten about. I mean, I know that maybe within that particular community, they'll never forget that, but the British public, it's like, you know, you go back to major incidents of the past. I remember growing up when Stephen Lawrence lost his life. That incident was talked about for decades.
And still is.
I know, but what I'm saying is, then you've got that incident in Southport, it's gone, and till the next one. And then there's another murder on the street, and then another murder on the street. But I don't really understand why people aren't looking at what is actually happening and acting immediately. Like, how can the government not be sitting down and having their meetings and saying, guys, like, have you seen what's happening out there? We can't wait anymore. It's got to be immediate. You know, you talk about releasing people early from prison, right, back into the system. But what you need to be doing is you need to be introducing penalties for carrying weapons. So when there's a stop and search and someone's carrying a machete, or what they call the big knives?
Zombie knife.
Zombie knife. It's 10 years.
15-year-old was killed with a zombie knife yesterday in London.
10 years. Not for killing someone, for carrying one. What? There's no reason to carry a knife and a zombie knife. So what's the problem? Oh, well, our jails are full. Fucking do something else then. Build more jails. Because you have to put people off. They don't care. It's what I'm talking about, kids having respect. They have no fear for the consequences. They have no fear for the reactions and the actions. Like, what world do we live in where a kid's at home, right, and they go under their bed and pull out a zombie knife like this, put it in their trousers and walk the streets with it, ready to...
It genuinely is insane, the world we are living in, and he's right that we've become so desensitised to it that this just seems normal now, but people like him who are a bit older than me and have lived in a previous time where that was completely abnormal, I mean, it's just absolutely shocking. You know, a lot of the things, if you're asking yourself if something that's happening today is insane, is say, how would we think of this 10 years ago or 20 years ago? And, you know, that really helps you put things into perspective. I think that the fact that, as he says, you've got teenagers who will happily just walk around the streets waving around machetes in broad daylight with no fear whatsoever is insane, because of course there was a past time where you'd be terrified to do that because you'd be terrified of being thrown behind bars. But the kids know now, oh yeah, if the police see me, they're not going to give a toss. It is an absolutely shocking state of affairs. And I think he's really showing just how serious this is, and our politicians are not taking it seriously enough.
Use it. The only way you're going to deter people from doing that is for immediate sentencing and zero tolerance.
It's so simple, the solution.
We'll let you out in 3 months. I mean, you look at some of the other disgraceful things that people are doing at the moment, they're not even getting time in jail. But this is a very straightforward thing that's introduced from the government. You get caught with a knife on the street, you do 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, and then they talk about, well, it's the cost of, good. You putting the taxes up, right? So this is the other thing at the moment. You've got the budget coming up. The taxes are going to go up, right? No problem. As long as this is a safe place to live. So you're asking people, like me as well, and that's all right, and people say, oh, well, you got loads of money. Yeah, do you know how much tax we pay a year? Fucking tens of millions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a problem with it. But I do have a problem with it if my kids are not safe to walk the streets. And I ain't staying here if my kids ain't safe to walk the streets. I'm not staying here for their kids to not be safe to walk the streets. So unless you put the tax up, you use the money to make our country great again and to make the streets safe again. That's what I'm concerned about. And I don't see it. I don't see these spineless politicians without the ability to act and to stand up and say, enough's enough.
Replace Mark Rowley with Eddie Hearn, I say. I mean, he's just absolutely spot on, and he just shows that, you know, it's not rocket science. The solution is so simple, yet our politicians do not have the spine, and our police chiefs do not have the spine to do it. It's very simple. If you want to deter people from doing something, i.e. carrying knives, there need to be consequences for it. There need to be harsh consequences for it, right? We've seen examples recently of people having been murdered by people who have been caught multiple times by the police with machetes, but nothing was done about it. Those lives could have been saved if the first time they were caught with a machete, they were thrown in prison. 10 years, as Eddie says, it needs to be a harsh consequence. And I really want to pick up on one of those last points he was making about the tax, right? There are other countries, France, for example, where the tax rate is pretty high, like in the UK, but people don't complain about it so much because they feel like they're actually getting something in return for their money, right? You go to Paris and you will see people, you will see the police walking around the streets far more regularly than you see them in London. They are armed, and they very much are people that you do not want to mess with. They will deal with you quickly and seriously if you step out of line. You don't really see that in the UK, and as Eddie says, he's a father, he's got kids, and if he doesn't feel like the taxes, the tens of millions of taxes that he pays every year in this country is going towards making the streets safe for them, he'll leave, right? And we've got so many millionaires and billionaires leaving this country to go to other places where they feel like they'll actually get their money's worth if they have to pay tax, right? If you're going to put up taxes, you're not going to get away with it. The British public are not going to accept it if they're not getting anything in return for our money. You know, I've always been my whole life so grateful to have been born in Britain. The main reason being that I feel safe, usually, to walk the streets whenever I want to. Okay, there are so many other countries where I could have grown up in, where I'd have to stay at home the whole time. We couldn't just run round the village with our friends and do what we want and play and learn like proper kids. There are plenty of countries where it's not safe to do that, and I'm so grateful that in Britain I've been able to do that. But, you know, if I ever have children, I feel like that's not going to be the case anymore. They're not going to be able to run round freely and do what they want and learn and play like proper children. I want my kids to grow up in a safe country, right? And there are so many people who are going to leave this country and go elsewhere, take the money that they would have paid in tax to other countries, if this country doesn't do something now with the money that we pay them in tax to keep our streets safe. Absolutely brilliant from Eddie Hearn, and well done to the Stomping Ground for doing that interview with him. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'm Chloe Dobbs. Make sure you subscribe to the Reason channel so you don't miss out on any more content. We'll see you soon.